All right, welcome back to 3D animation. This next lesson, we're going to explore kind of a couple things in combination and hopefully explore continuing use of the graph editor for animation in Maya. So we're going to talk about animating a deformer. Really good for making simple little kind of like organic movements and forms and shapes without having to rig yet. And then we're going to add glowing textures and shader effects to that. And then we're also going to look at sort of animating some of those texture effects and just how to access all of that down here in the graph editor, okay? So let's start off with deformers. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in a cylinder, and I'm just going to lengthen this out a little bit, and I'm just going to rotate it. Let's just think of it as something like we're going to make this like a little tentacle arm or something, okay? So that looks good, cool. And I'm going to go ahead and add some subdivision to this guy. So let's go ahead and go to our attributes window. Sorry, I'm in my animation window right now, so it's not always the easiest one to bring up. Whoop, yep, there we go. All right, let's go to the poly cylinder here, and let's add some subdivision, because we know to use a deformer, we have to have some subdivision, otherwise it looks all kind of clunky, right? So I'm going to add, increase that. Let's just bring that up to like 30 on the lengthwise. That should be good. All right, cool. And let's see, anything else we want to do? No, I think that's good for right now. So let's go ahead and we'll rotate this into place just so we can see it at a slight angle. I'm going to raise it up from the grid just so we don't have any visibility issues. All right, cool. So we have this cool cylinder. Let's go ahead and add a deformer. So I'm going to go to deformer, and I'm going to go to nonlinear. And let's do this first. Let's go ahead and add a flare to this guy. Because I'm just going to kind of pinch in the end of one end of it. Remember on deformers, to get the deform handles, I mean, we can always, again, go to the attributes to control it, but if we hit the letter T, we get these lovely blue handles, right? So I can come in here and I can pinch down one end of this and make it more like a pinchy arm or whatever we want to call it. And if we want, I can kind of bulge that a little bit too, right? That looks cool. Not too bad. All right, I can deal with that. So we now have our cylinder, original cylinder, and our flare handle. Just because I'm not going to animate both of these, I'm going to actually just animate a bend of this. I'm going to go ahead and delete history on this guy and just turn it back into a solid cylinder. So that's just frozen as that now. Now that default arm is gone, right? And I'm going to go ahead and lengthen this out a little bit and maybe just kind of fatten it out in a few dimensions there. There we go. Now we're starting to get that kind of like tentacle arm. Okay, I'm going to save before I lose all this. Deformer, animation, shade, glow shader, just so we know that this is all about. And I'm going to save this to my desktop. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and add a bend deformer now. So I'm going to go back to deform. I'm going to go to nonlinears, and I'm going to go ahead and add a bend, okay? And again, on that bend, I'm going to hit the letter T so that I can see what's going on, right? Okay, so I can, do all sorts of things. I can bend this sucker in a couple different directions. That's fine. I can decide where I want it to bend, how much of it I want it to bend. If I want that end of it to bend or that end of it to bend, that's kind of cool. Maybe I'll get that one to bend, and then this is kind of bending it in that direction, right? And I'm going to go ahead and rotate this whole thing. Actually, I'm sorry, that's not going to bend the deform, but actually, let's see if I can rotate this whole thing. Okay, cool. There we go. I'm going to rotate the deform handles downward just so we can kind of see this better in the viewport. All right, and just kind of moving that up a little bit. Cool. So now we have the bend handle. We know we can deform it however we want. I can hit letter T on that, and I can extend here. I can bring it down, bend that, and get kind of a tentacle-like arm on it, right? So how do I animate this? Well, let's go ahead and bring up that attributes panel again. So I'm going to bring up the attributes just so we can see the bend handles. So I'm going to click on bend handle here, and whether I'm controlling this end or this end. Sorry, I lost my little arm there for a second. But either way, I can come back to the bend handle, and oh, where'd that little guy go? I think it's inside it. I think I might have let it go inside of it. Hold on. Oh, that's interesting. There we go. Sorry, I had kind of pulled it all the way in and then lost track of it. So let's go ahead and bring that back. Bring this one in, and there we go. Sorry, I wanted to control this aspect of it, right? So let's go to the bend handle. There we go, bend. So basically what we're controlling here is the curvature, right? So as I'm moving that up and down, I'm getting different values on that curvature. I also have the low bound and the high bound. So if I wanted to go in this direction, I can bend it down. And then how much is dependent there, right? So let's start here. Let's go ahead and just start with pretty low. What I'm going to do is set some keyframes. So I want to make sure that I'm at frame 1 here. So I'm going to go ahead and move my cursor to frame 1. And I'm going to right click on curvature here and I'm going to say set key. Same thing on low bound set key and high bound set key, just in case I decide to move any of these things, right? And then I'm just going to move my cursor. Maybe I move to like, I'm doing it 24 frames per second, so I'll move out to 24 here. And let's try changing some of that curvature. So now I'm going to bend it downward. And I think that's good. Maybe I'll do even like the high bound bend a little bit just to give it a little more curve to it. Let me zoom out on that. And now, as you can see, they've turned from red to kind of like a pinkish color. So I'm going to right click on these again and set another key, and another key, and another key, right? You can see that the bend handle is showing up in here, but we have to unfold it. You have to hit that little plus sign, just like you would in After Effects to see kind of like embedded keyframes inside of it. And now we can see these individual components. We can either do the handle where we see all of them. So we have low bound, which we didn't really change anything on the low bound. We have high bound, which we did change that. And we have curvature, which we changed that as well, right? So we can now see this over time. We can animate it, and we can get that going, right? So if we want to, we can play around with these. We can obviously, play around with the curvature of it. We could break or free the tangents and play around with that curvature like we did in some of our previous lessons. However we want that movement over time to happen. But I can go ahead and do that, and there we see it, right? It's nice and slowly went down, right? I could also, dip it or try to have it even more gradually kind of happen. And then it kind of goes down as well. So depending on however you want to do it, or I could lengthen things out and make it happen over 30 frames. There we go. So that's just hive bond, and then there's the curvature as well. If I wanted to come in here, I could do the same thing there and kind of bring that and move that over to 30. And let's see how that affects the animation. There we go. I actually got a little bob there at the beginning because I made that value go kind of lower than the original value. So if you can see, it actually comes up, and then down. It's almost that like, anticipation again, and it's up and then swoops downward. So that's kind of a cool thing to think about, to get a little bit of that like momentum, and then it swings down nice and slow. So you can play with it in the curve editor. But the big one here to be able to see this bend handle was again to just unfold it, and then you can see all these individual parameters and you can see the keyframes. So super simple to get things going, to get some animated effects with deformers, and to get things bending over time, right? Let's go ahead and make this animation a little bit longer, and let's see it. Whoops, sorry, let's see the full 500. There we go, see the full 500 frames. Cool. And I could always zoom it out on this. I'm navigating with the middle button to drag it over, and I'm just zooming in and out with my scroll wheel like we did when we introduced the graph editor. So there we go, about 1 second. Because I dip below, it goes up for a second and then back down again, and we're good to go. I could accentuate that even more, like I could make that bend happen even just a little bit more on both of these. And then we would see up a little more and then down, right? And so just a lot of possibilities there of how we can get the movement. If I want to, I could always come up here and break the handle. Same thing on this one here. I could go ahead and choose this guy and break the handle. And then that's going to give me the ability to kind of do things separately from one keyframe to the next. Just depends on what you want to do. If I want to zoom out here to see the other side, I don't have any motion after that yet, but if I wanted to bring it back up, so say I go to frame 60, and then I bring that curvature value back up. Well, I don't want to mess with that one, but then I could like even increase that maybe just a little bit more, and right click, set key, right click, set key. There's a new keyframe there, and set key again. Then we can see how all these things are going to move together, right? And now I can come in here, and same thing here. If I wanted to, I could break the handle on this guy. Oh, I already broke the handle on that one. And I could have it do all sorts of different movements to it, right? I could curve that out. So what happens if I do this? See, that was very abrupt, right? Maybe we want these to have a little bit more of a smoothness to it. Let's try that. We've got to get this bend as well. We'll smooth that one out. Take a look at that. There we go. Way more smooth. You see how it kind of gradually came down and then back up again? So, you know, these shapes matter. You're going to get a lot more flexibility out of them, right? So I just got like a tentacle arm that's going up and going down. So it's amazing what you can do, how you can animate these, and there's, you know, all kinds of deformers. You know, I'm just showing you the non-linear deformers. There's flare, sine, squash, twist, wave, but there's all sorts of different ones in here. There's a jiggle one that I'm going to give you as a homework assignment in the future for additional things you can do, but there's all sorts of deformers, and just by doing that right click in the attributes on the different parameters, you can animate them, and you can come over here and check them out, right? So I've still got the original piece cylinder, but then I've got that. So whatever I choose to click on, you know, I can do just the bend handle and just get that information. I can get the cylinder, which has the bend handle kind of embedded in it within the mesh. I could click on both and kind of see them both separately, like the cylinder with it. It's kind of a repeat there, but I could see multiple things show up here depending on what I select in my outliner. So lots of ways to control your objects, have some fun, learn how they're working, right? All right, next thing I want to do is let's try adding a glow texture to this. There are, like, you know, old school glow effects if you're trying to use the software render, but for my class, everybody needs to be using the Arnold renderer at this point. It's just too good of a renderer to try anything else. So the techniques I'm going to show you two techniques. One is using the emission settings on an Arnold standard shader, and the other would be turning this whole arm into a mesh light to give it kind of a glowing effect, right? So let's look at just adding an emission to an AI standard surface shader, right? So, okay, I'm going to click on my cylinder. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to assign a new material. I'm going to go click on Arnold. I'm going to get that AI standard surface. I'm sorry, I always say AI standard shader, but it's AI standard surface. You can see since my attributes are up here, I'm actually going to go ahead and add my attributes to this bar. Oops, tried to. Let's see if I can get it on that tab bar. There we go. That's where I want it. I like it in here, so I would like it with for the animation bar, so I just want to make sure that's always there for me. All right, I'm going to hit these arrows over here and go over to the standard surface settings. And let's go ahead and turn X-ray off. And yeah, that's good. We can now see our color a little bit better. I'm going to make this like a neon blue. All right. Now, first thing I can do to start to give this a little bit of a glow, if I come down here to emission, I can add a glow color to it, right? So I could make it glow the same color or maybe like a slightly white version of it or something like that. And then I could, you know, how much do I want to bring that weight in, right? I'm going to hit save here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up the Arnold preview window here. We might need a light source. Oh no, cool. So the emission is already showing up here, and you know, I could make it get a lot brighter or a lot lower. This will affect other objects in the scene as well. So you can illuminate it. It will make other things glow in here. So if, say, I come back, let me close the preview window to polymodeling and add a floor. Let me just see how far. That's not too far away. That should light it up. Let's see how that looks now. When I come back to my Arnold render preview. Yeah, so it is treated as like a light source, like it is making the other environment glow. The downside of emission settings is that it's noisy. It's more noisy than doing a mesh light, like turning this object into a mesh light. And you have way more control over the light itself and the quality of it and all of its things if you do a mesh light. But emission is really easy, right? Like any object, you can turn on the emission. And I do believe if we increase the sample, the emission sample, you can reduce noise, but it's going to increase render time a lot, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick. So we're going to increase the diffuse samples, which I believe are under our render settings. So if I go to Arnold, yep. So if I increase this right here, the diffuse samples, you'll get less noise. And it still renders pretty quick, so now I'm getting a much smoother emission of light that's coming out of it. Now, obviously, if I go up to like 7, super smooth, but takes a while to render, right? So let's bring that back down a little bit. I'd be happy with that. There's a little bit of noise there. Maybe I go to a 5, just to bring it up a little bit, okay? Cool. And if we want to, we could animate that as well, right? We can go ahead and close that window. I can save. And if I want to, I can come to the, let me get back over here, click on my object, and get over to that AI standard surface that I created. Let's just call this blue glow emission, so we know the name of it. And, I could animate the weight category here. So if I come back to the beginning of my animation here, and I right-click on weight, I can set a key. And, we're at 0.971 right now. And then I'll come to here, and maybe I bring that weight down and set another key. And then I come to the end here and bring that back up to 0.971. Get close to it anyway. Yeah, that's good. And right-click on it and set a key again. Now you're going to see the glow come down and back up again as the arm is waving. Now, one trick here is just clicking on the cylinder. This doesn't bring your that set of keyframes in. You got to go to your hyper shader and then actually click on the blue glow. And here now we can see, if I close hyper shader, you can see here's my blue glow emission, and I can actually control the movement of that if I want it to happen sharply, if I want to tweak my tangents. And that's how you can set those different texture weights. All right. So beyond that, that's how you do it with emission. Let's look at how we can do the same thing, but how we can do it with turning this whole thing into a mesh light. So I'm going to delete those off of there so we don't have the animated emission anymore. Now we're going to go back and click off of this guy right now and go back and look at the cylinder again. So you'll notice again, here we are, dipping down, coming back up, no change in color emissions. So let's turn this whole object into a mesh light. Now, one thing to keep in mind with mesh lights, mesh lights don't work. They will ignore smoothing on a poly object, and they're also going to ignore NURBs. They don't work with NURBs right now. So you have to convert that NURB to a polygon. All right, so I'm not going to smooth it anymore to do that example, but it will kind of like give you the mesh of the original and not the smoothed object. So just know the mesh lights aren't going to work with that smoothed poly object, and it's not, or it's just going to ignore it. It's going to look at the original object, and then it's also going to ignore NURBs. But we have neither of those, so let's see what we can do. So I'm going to take my cylinder here. I'm going to go ahead to the Arnold tab, and I'm going to create a mesh light, which is this second one here, create mesh light. And you'll see that if I actually open up the cylinder, here's my mesh light inside of it. It becomes kind of nested in there. And you'll see that now I have a mesh light that's nested as well as the bend deformer. Now I also have this mesh light element going on, right? So let's bring my attributes back up. Sorry, when I crashed it lost that I was trying to keep this in my little tab here. There we go. And let's go ahead and come on over here and click on the mesh light settings. So first thing I want to know is, like, do I want the light to be visible or not? Let's go ahead and take a look at this right now and see what we can see, right? So we've got the original. I can show the original mesh inside of there or not by clicking this little guy on underneath the cylinder shape. So do I want to see it or do I just want to see the light? I actually want to see the arm, but I want to see it glowing through there. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, show the original, right? And then I can decide if I want to have light visible or just the object. That's another option that I have there, right? So right out of the gate, if I go ahead and I'm going to increase my intensity quite a bit just to be able to see this. I'm going to take this up to like 100, and I'm going to take my exposure to say 5. And then I'm going to bring up and I'm going to go ahead and save. And I'm going to bring up my Arnold preview here. And there we go. You can see there's my object. It's obviously taking a minute to kind of render out, but not too bad. And you can see it's casting light downward onto the area below. And if I want to, I can go back to the mesh light. There we go. And let's go ahead and see visible light. That's interesting. It's like only part of it is visible. I wonder if that, sometimes I've had an issue where I've had to, oh, I wonder if it's an interference with the deformer somehow there. That's really interesting that it's cutting off right there. I have before done this and just kind of increased the subdivision and gotten rid of this bug, but I've never seen it happen because of a deformer. So that's something new there to consider. When you add the mesh light, we might have to depends if you're animating the deformer properties or whatnot, but that's really interesting that it stops there. It also stops at a little bit at the, nope, the end cap is filling in. So interesting. Okay, well, we'll keep working with it. It's still glowing. So let's go back to the mesh light here. So whether I want the whole thing to glow or not, or just light emits from it without glowing, let's see if I take off the original mesh and show visible light. Hey, that works at least. So I think it must be a bug with showing the original mesh underneath, because now I have this glowing arm, right? And if I want to, just so I still have that same effect, I could make it, there's the blue on it, and kind of get it back to where it was before. So if I show the original mesh there, that's interesting where that kind of cuts off at the deformer. So good to know. All right, so maybe I don't need that intensity. Maybe I can bring it down a bit. Maybe I make it a little bit less here. Maybe I even bring my exposure down a little bit. But now I can get a really cool glowing effect off of my whole arm here, right? And it's very neon, and I could always increase or decrease that over time. So if I want to actually add some parameters for the mesh light, I can go ahead and you'll see the light is here, so then we're going to add some keyframes for that, right? So maybe I want to change its color over time, right? So let's go ahead and take I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and close this, and then we'll look at it here in a minute. Let's go ahead back to the beginning. And I'm going to go ahead and set a keyframe for color and intensity. I'm going to right-click on that, set key, and right-click on intensity and set key. All right. And now I'm going to go to the 30 mark, and I'm going to change its color to like a green color. And then I'm going to change its intensity to say like 5. And I'm going to right-click on that and set a key. And then I'm going to go back to the end here. And oh, it looks like it already returned to blue at the end. Oh, you know what? I must have not set a key on the green. Let's do that again. So change that to green. And then set key on it. And then, yep, now we can change it to a blue. And set key. And let's increase that back up again. We'll go a little higher this time. Cool. All right, so now we should see a transform to green and a back down again, right? So let's go ahead and look at this in the render view, because it's hard to see. You can't see mesh lights just in your preview, right? So let's go ahead and do this again. Bring up the Arnold window here. So there's our bend. Over time, you can see it's turning to green and then back out to blue again. Very cool. And I can come into my mesh light here, and I can see some of the settings that I'm doing on the mesh light. Or actually, I'm sorry, this isn't the mesh light. This is, I'm trying to get the mesh light controls in here. There we go. There's the RGB. You can see the blue really changes there over time, and there's the intensity curve. So we just needed to click on the actual object in the outliner for the mesh light, and now we can see those shifts over time, right, to blue and then back out again. Now these I can control just fine. So if I want to play with the angles of them and move them around, I could play around with that timing. I could break them. I could expand them. You know, maybe here's where I want to come in and break the tangents again, and then kind of control a faster rebound from blue to green or something like that as it shifts around. So you can have a lot of fun with this. You can play with shadow densities. It's actually without having to turn up its sample rate too much. We're not getting a lot of noise out of it, so that's one of the advantages of the mesh light. And it just has the ability to do a lot more. You can play around with the specular quality, the diffusion of the light, the number of bounces. There's just a lot more controls that you can do with a mesh light. You can also, yeah, that's interesting though about the, I'm gonna have to figure out why the show original mesh does that cancellation at the deformer. It must be a combination of the two. But the other thing we could bring into this is we could also do some volumetric lighting. Now it's going to increase your render time, but remember if I come up here, my render settings, and I click on Arnold Render, and I open up Environment, and I have this guy selected. Yep, if I come to my environment here, and I go ahead and say Create AI Atmosphere Volume, and then I click on the little arrow next to it, then I can play around with the density of that. I'm going to go very conservative on this. I'm going to do 0.01. And you can see it adds kind of a fog quality to the light as well. Now I could increase that. I could say like 0.05. And you can see I'm getting a really nice like volumetric light quality out of it as well. So if I want kind of like a misty glow going on off of that tentacle. There you go, off of the blue seems to show it off a little more than the green does, but you can see I get this like atmospheric kind of soft glow to it too. Maybe that was the intensity level as well from the beginning to the end. That really does increase or decrease the amount that that's happening. So I could get a really soft glow that way, which is also really nice. So don't forget about that atmosphere volume. Just remember though, look at my render time. It's still rendering this pane because of that. And atmosphere volumes do add some noise. You can see there's a lot of kind of like atmospheric noise there. If I want to decrease that, I can again click on this little black arrow to bring up the atmosphere volume attributes, and I could increase my sample rate. I could say like go to 8. Again, my render time for each frame is going to get a lot slower, but then I'm going to get a much smoother, less noise, or a more noiseless atmospheric light, that volumetric light quality that we might be looking for if you want to make something that glows or is kind of bioluminescent or fuzzy. All right. All right, I think I'm going to stop there before I increase your render time anymore. Hopefully this helps you understand how to animate a deformer, how to animate some of the parameters on an AI standard surface with an emission control, or how to turn an object into a mesh light, and then how to animate those parameters. And maybe even how to bring some atmospheric light or a light volume into your space. All right, let me know if you have any questions, and thanks as always for tuning in.